Welcome to my channel, where every story comes to life. Dive into captivating narratives that spark your imagination. Let's start today. New narrative story. Tom Harris, 34. A hard-working mechanic from Melbourne, devoted to raising his daughter after his ex-wife left. Emily Harris, 32. Tom's ex-wife, a marketing executive who abandoned her family in pursuit of a different life. Ava Harris, 11. Tom and Emily's daughter, bright and curious, unaware of her mother's past until now. Liam Smith, 36. Emily's new boyfriend, a compassionate man who values family and insists on honesty. The sun was setting over the bustling city of Melbourne, casting an orange glow over the skyline. Tom Harris, a dedicated mechanic, stood in the driveway of his modest home, cradling his one-year-old daughter, Ava. The gentle hum of the city around him was a stark contrast to the turmoil inside his heart. Just days before, Emily, his wife and Ava's mother, had walked out the door, leaving behind nothing but a hastily written note that shattered Tom's world. "I need to find myself. I can't do this anymore." Tom's heart raced as he replayed the moment in his mind. They had shared dreams, plans for their future, and now it all felt like a cruel joke. He looked down at Ava, her big blue eyes gazing back at him with innocence. She had no idea of the storm that had just struck their little family. As tears welled in his eyes, Tom vowed silently to protect her at all costs. The first year without Emily was a whirlwind of sleepless nights and endless responsibilities. Tom juggled his job at the local garage and the demands of parenthood, navigating the complexities of being a single father. He often found solace in the warmth of Ava's small frame as she curled up next to him on the couch, her laughter echoing in the silence of their home. Tom's days were filled with fixing cars and managing the workshop, but his nights were dedicated to Ava. He read her bedtime stories, played dress-up, and comforted her when she had bad dreams. With each passing day, their bond grew stronger, but the void left by Emily loomed large. "Why doesn't Mummy come home?" Ava asked one night, her small voice tinged with confusion. Tom's heart broke anew as he searched for the right words. "Mummy is on an adventure, sweetheart," he said gently, brushing her hair back from her forehead. "But you have me, and I'll always be here for you." Ava's eyes sparkled with trust, and in that moment, Tom knew he would do whatever it took to shield her from the hurt. As the years rolled on, Tom's garage became not just a workplace but a sanctuary. He poured his heart into his craft, and his reputation as a skilled mechanic grew. His days were filled with grease and engines, but he always found time to teach Ava the basics of fixing a car. One Saturday afternoon, he set up a makeshift workbench in the backyard, complete with tools he had carefully collected over the years. Ava, now 6, wore a miniature tool belt and a pair of goggles that were too big for her face. "Today, we're going to change the oil, just like a real mechanic," Tom announced, grinning. Ava giggled, her enthusiasm infectious. Together they worked side by side, a perfect team. "Look, Dad, I did it!" she exclaimed, wiping her hands on her overalls after successfully loosening a bolt. Tom beamed with pride. In moments like this, he felt an overwhelming sense of purpose. Fast forward 5 years. Ava was now 11, a bright and curious girl with an infectious laugh. Tom was still navigating life as a single parent, filled with challenges, but also incredible joy. One evening, while fixing a car, his phone buzzed with an unexpected message. The name lit up the screen. Emily. His heart raced as he opened the message. "Can we talk?" "It's urgent." Tom's stomach churned. It had been a decade since she left, and he had thought he was finally free of the ghosts of their past. He felt anger surge within him, but also a flicker of curiosity. What could she possibly want after all this time? After a restless night, Tom decided to meet her. He chose a cafe that held memories of happier times, a place where they had shared dreams over cups of coffee. As Tom entered the cafe, he spotted Emily at a corner table, nervously fidgeting with her coffee cup. She looked different, stylish and polished, but her eyes reflected a hint of regret. He approached cautiously, heart pounding. "Emily," he said, his voice steady but laced with tension. She looked up, and for a moment, the years melted away. But then reality set in. "Tom, thank you for meeting me," she began, her voice shaky. "I know it's been a long time." "Long time doesn't even begin to cover it," he shot back, anger bubbling just beneath the surface. "You left us. You abandoned your family." "I know, and I'm sorry," she said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I was young and scared. I thought I could just move on. I was young and scared. I thought I could just move on." "Move on?" Tom's voice rose. "You moved on while I raised our daughter alone." The conversation spiraled, filled with emotions that had been bottled up for years. Emily finally gathered her courage. "I'm here because of Liam. He found out about Ava and he wants to meet her." Tom's jaw tightened. "Why? So you can play the role of the mother you abandoned?" Emily looked pained but resolute. "I want to make amends. I want to know her, to be part of her life." Tom's heart ached for Ava. He had protected her from the hurt of Emily's absence, but now she was old enough to start asking questions. "I need time to think," Tom replied, standing up. "This isn't something you can just waltz back into." As he left the cafe, his mind raced with conflicting thoughts. Could he really allow Emily back into their lives after everything? That night, Tom faced the difficult task of telling Ava. Sitting on her bed, he felt a knot form in his stomach. "Ava, I need to talk to you about something important," he began, his voice steady. "What is it, Dad?" she asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Your mom, Emily, she wants to meet you." Ava's eyes lit up, a mix of excitement and confusion. "Really? I want to meet her." Tom's heart sank. "But you don't understand. She left us, Ava. She chose to walk away." "But I want to know her," Ava insisted, her voice soft but determined. "Maybe she's changed." Tom wrestled with his emotions. He saw the hope in his daughter's eyes and knew he had to consider her feelings. After days of sleepless nights, he finally decided to allow a meeting, albeit cautiously. Days turned into weeks as Tom prepared for the meeting. He chose a park where Ava could feel safe and relaxed. The morning of the meeting, he watched as Ava bounced with excitement, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing a new dress. "Do I look okay, Dad?" she asked, twirling around. Tom couldn't help but smile. "You look perfect, sweetheart." As they arrived at the park, Tom felt a mix of anticipation and dread. Emily was already there, looking nervous, her hands fidgeting with a bouquet of flowers. "Hi, I'm Emily," she said softly as Ava approached. "Hi," Ava replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The three of them sat on a bench, the air thick with tension. "I've missed so much of your life, Ava," Emily began, her voice trembling. "And I'm really sorry." Ava tilted her head, studying her mother. "Why did you leave?" Tom held his breath, knowing this moment would define everything. Emily took a deep breath. "I was lost. I didn't know how to be a mother. I thought it was better for you both if I left." The months that followed were a delicate balancing act. Emily slowly began to spend more time with Ava, attending school events and joining them for weekend outings. Tom watched from the sidelines, torn between anger and the desire to see Ava happy. One Saturday, they visited the zoo. Tom kept a close eye on Emily as she interacted with Ava, sharing laughter over silly animal antics. For a moment, He felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this could work. "Look, Dad, I want to feed the giraffes," Ava exclaimed, tugging at Tom's hand. As they approached the giraffe enclosure, Tom noticed Emily watching Ava with a mix of admiration and longing. "You're doing great, Ava," she said, her voice warm. "Thanks, Mum." Ava beamed. Tom felt a pang of jealousy, but he also saw Ava thriving. It was a complicated web of emotions, but he was determined to keep his daughter's best interests at heart. Final showdown. As their relationship grew, so did Tom's discomfort. One evening, Emily approached Tom at the workshop, her face set with determination. "I want to be a real part of Ava's life," she declared, her eyes searching his. "I've changed, and I'm ready to take responsibility." Tom felt the weight of her words, but couldn't shake the memories of betrayal. "It's not that simple, Emily. You can't just walk back in and expect everything to be fine." "I know I messed up, but I want to make it right," she pleaded. Tom's anger flared. "You've already hurt her once. I won't let that happen again." Emily's shoulders slumped, but she didn't give up. "I'm not asking for a free pass. I'm willing to earn your trust one step at a time." After days of reflection, Tom realized that he couldn't shield Ava from the possibility of reconciliation. They agreed on boundaries. Emily would see Ava regularly, but Tom would remain involved in every step of the process. Slowly, trust began to rebuild. Tom watched as Ava blossomed with Emily's presence, her laughter filling their home. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Tom felt a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. "This is nice," Ava said, a smile lighting up her face. "Yeah, it is," Tom replied, glancing at Emily, who met his gaze with gratitude. In that moment, both for himself and for Emily. It was a long road, but they were willing to walk it together. Years later, as Ava prepared for her high school graduation, Tom felt a swell of pride. She had become a confident young woman, ready to take on the world. Emily stood by, a new, supportive presence, and for the first time, Tom felt a sense of peace. "Are you ready, Ava?" Tom asked, his heart swelling with emotion. "Yeah, Dad. I can't believe it's finally here," Ava replied, her eyes sparkling with excitement. As they stepped outside, Tom took a moment to reflect on the journey they had shared. Despite the challenges and heartache, they had forged a new family dynamic, one built on understanding and forgiveness. "Thank you for being here," Tom said to Emily, gratitude in his voice. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," she replied, her eyes filled with sincerity. The graduation ceremony was a whirlwind of emotions. Tom watched as Ava walked across the stage, accepting her diploma. The pride swelling in his chest was overwhelming, and he glanced at Emily, who was beaming with joy. As the ceremony concluded, they gathered for pictures, capturing the moment forever. "Dad, can you believe I did it?" Ava exclaimed, her face flushed with happiness. "I'm so proud of you, Ava. You've worked hard for this," Tom replied, pulling her into a tight embrace. Emily joined them, wrapping her arms around both of them. "This is just the beginning, Ava. I'm so proud of you, too." As they stood together, Tom felt a sense of unity he had never thought possible. They had come through the darkness together, emerging stronger and more resilient. Turning to the camera, Tom smiled. "Thank you for joining us on this journey. Life has its twists and turns, but it's how we navigate them that defines us. If you have any questions about our story or want to share your own experiences, drop a comment below. And don't forget to like and share this story. Until next time." As the screen faded to black, the audience was left reflecting on the complexities of love, loss, and the transformative power of forgiveness and redemption. Tom, Emily, and Ava had not only rebuilt their lives but had also forged an unbreakable bond that would carry them forward into a brighter future.
Welcome to my channel. Support our channel by subscribing. Your subscription helps us grow and create more intriguing content like this. Now, let's dive into today's story. A 47-year-old woman who recently lost her husband, Paul, after a long battle with illness. Christine works as a nurse at a local hospital in Vancouver, a job that has kept her busy and emotionally invested in helping others. She had been married to Paul for 22 years, and they shared a deep love and respect for one another. After Paul's death, Christine found solace in holding on to the small tokens of their life together, most notably Paul's wedding ring. The ring had always been a symbol of their commitment, love, and the family they built. Christine's daughter, Megan, a 24-year-old aspiring graphic designer living in the same city, was excited about her upcoming wedding to her fiancé, Dylan, a 26-year-old software developer. Megan had been very close to her father, and the idea of using his wedding ring for her own wedding felt to her like the perfect way to honor him. However, when Megan requested to wear her late father's wedding ring for her own wedding day, Christine was faced with an emotional dilemma. Christine had always planned to keep the ring as a cherished reminder of Paul, and the idea of giving it away didn't sit well with her. For Christine, the ring was more than just a piece of jewelry. It was the final connection she had to the love of her life. Megan, on the other hand, didn't see the same attachment to the ring, viewing it as an important keepsake to wear on the most important day of her life. Megan, excited about her upcoming wedding, approached Christine with an unexpected request. She wanted to wear her father's wedding ring on her own wedding day. Megan had always looked up to her father, and the idea of having something tangible to represent his presence at her wedding seemed very important to her. She imagined the ring as a way to carry her father's love with her into her own marriage. Megan was planning a lavish wedding with her fiancé Dylan, which was already putting a financial strain on both families. She didn't see the problem with using the ring as a sentimental touch. Megan, who worked as a junior graphic designer, was financially supported by her parents for the wedding, but she also wanted this specific gesture from her mother. For her, the wedding ring would not just symbolize her connection to her father, but also serve as a beautiful tribute to the bond they shared. However, when Christine refused, Megan felt hurt and betrayed. She couldn't understand why her mother wouldn't be willing to give up something so meaningful to her, especially when it would make Megan so happy. She didn't see how it could possibly be wrong to wear her father's ring, and she started to feel that Christine was being selfish and overly sentimental about the past. Christine's refusal to give the ring to Megan sparked a growing tension between mother and daughter. Megan, feeling rejected and misunderstood, became upset. She believed her mother was being unnecessarily possessive of something that, in her eyes, had little value beyond a symbol of her parents' love. Megan tried to explain how much the ring meant to her and how it would bring her closer to her father on her wedding day. But Christine remained steadfast in her decision. Christine, on the other hand, struggled with her own emotions. Losing Paul had been devastating, and the ring was the last remaining piece of him. For her, the idea of giving it up was like losing another part of him. She felt a deep emotional connection to the ring and couldn't imagine parting with it. The more Megan pushed for the ring, the more Christine's sense of loss and grief resurfaced. The refusal caused a rift between them, and Christine feared that the bond they had shared was beginning to crack. The situation became even more complicated when the family dynamics shifted, with Christine's mother-in-law, Elaine Day, getting involved. Elaine, 72, a retired teacher and Christine's late husband's mother, quickly sided with Megan. She viewed Christine's refusal as a sign of emotional immaturity and a reluctance to let go of the past. Having been widowed herself, Elaine believed it was time for Christine to move on and let go of sentimental attachments. She felt that Megan, as the next generation, deserved the wedding ring as a symbol of her connection to her late grandfather. Elaine's influence over Megan intensified the pressure on Christine, as she began to feel that not only was she being criticized by her daughter, but now her mother-in-law was also attacking her emotional stance. Christine's refusal to give the ring to Megan sparked a growing tension between mother and daughter. Megan, feeling rejected and misunderstood, became upset. She believed her mother was being unnecessarily possessive of something that, in her eyes, had little value beyond a symbol of her parents' love. Megan tried to explain how much the ring meant to her and how it would bring her closer to her father on her wedding day. But Christine remained steadfast in her decision. Christine, on the other hand, struggled with her own emotions. Losing Paul had been devastating, and the ring was the last remaining piece of him. For her, the idea of giving it up was like losing another part of him. She felt a deep emotional connection to the ring and couldn't imagine parting with it. The more Megan pushed for the ring, the more Christine's sense of loss and grief resurfaced. The refusal caused a rift between them, and Christine feared that the bond they had shared was beginning to crack. The situation became even more complicated when the family dynamics shifted, with Christine's mother-in-law, Elaine, getting involved. Elaine, 72, a retired teacher and Christine's late husband's mother, quickly sided with Megan. She viewed Christine's refusal as a sign of emotional immaturity and a reluctance to let go of the past. Having been widowed herself, Elaine believed it was time for Christine to move on and let go of sentimental attachments. She felt that Megan, as the next generation, deserved the wedding ring as a symbol of her connection to her late grandfather. Elaine's influence over Megan intensified the pressure on Christine, as she began to feel that not only was she being criticized by her daughter, but now her mother-in-law was also attacking her emotional stance. Elaine's opinion carried weight, as she had always been a dominant figure in the family, and Megan trusted her grandmother's advice. Elaine didn't hesitate to tell Megan that her mother's refusal to give up the ring was selfish, that Christine was holding on to something that had no practical value anymore. This created even more friction. Megan, already hurt by her mother's refusal, began to see her mother's actions as an obstacle to her own happiness. The situation soon escalated, with Christine feeling cornered and isolated by the two most important women in her life. The pressure became unbearable. Calmly explained to Megan that she could no longer fund the wedding, not out of spite, but because she could not support a wedding built on disrespect and manipulation. Megan was furious, accusing her mother of being petty and vindictive. The two women had a heated argument, and Megan threatened to cut ties with Christine if she didn't change her mind. The decision to stop funding the wedding was a final, painful step for Christine. She hoped that it would force her daughter to understand the deeper reasons behind her refusal, but it also pushed their relationship to the brink. The fallout from Christine's decision to stop funding the wedding was immediate and severe. Megan, feeling betrayed, cut off communication with her mother for several weeks. She became consumed with anger, blaming Christine for ruining her special day. Elaine, now fully aligned with her granddaughter, criticized Christine's actions to anyone who would listen. The tension within the family grew, and Christine found herself isolated, both from her daughter and her mother-in-law. Christine, heartbroken and emotionally drained, questioned whether she had made the right choice. The financial implications were significant, but it was the emotional cost that weighed the heaviest. The once close relationship she had with Megan was now a battleground. Christine feared that she might lose her daughter forever, but at the same time, she was firm in her belief that she had to set boundaries in order to preserve her own emotional health. The fallout continued, with both parties hurting, unable to come to terms with the situation. The story concludes with an open-ended resolution. While there is no immediate reconciliation, Christine hopes that time will allow her daughter to reflect on the situation. She hopes that one day Megan will understand that her refusal wasn't about being selfish, but about holding on to precious memories. Christine remains open to rebuilding their relationship, but she knows that it will take time for both her and Megan to heal. The emotional scars remain, but Christine's decision to stand her ground, despite the cost, was a necessary step in finding her own peace. Megan, on the other hand, might eventually come to see her mother's side of the situation. After her wedding, she might realize that there are other ways to honor her father's memory, ways that don't require the wedding ring. In time, both mother and daughter may find a way back to each other, but it will be a long and difficult road. Christine hopes that with patience and understanding, their bond can be rebuilt, and the love they shared can once again be the foundation of their relationship. You're welcome. Thanks for watching, and I hope you found the story helpful. Feel free to reach out if you need anything else.
I wonder what our life would have been like if you hadn't moved away. I love Tom, I do. But there are moments when I regret not choosing you. I don't know if I can carry this secret much longer. I miss you. I wish you'd never left. Sarah. Tom's world shattered in that moment. The letter dropped from his hands as he stumbled back, his breath shallow and his heart pounding in his chest. He sat on the bed, staring blankly ahead. The silence of the house was deafening, the weight of Sarah's words pressing down on him like a heavy, suffocating blanket. The love of his life, his wife, the mother of his children, had been harboring feelings for someone else. How long had she felt this way? How deep did this go? Was it more than just an unsent letter? A swirl of emotions engulfed him: anger, betrayal, confusion, and a deep sadness. For years, Tom had believed that they had built something unbreakable, a partnership that could withstand any storm. But now, he wasn't so sure. Across town, Sarah Davies sat in a small cafe, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. Her mind was 1,000 miles away, replaying the events of the past few months in agonizing detail. She had met Ben by accident at a conference in Sydney. It had been years since they'd last seen each other, and she was surprised by the flood of emotions that hit her when she recognized him across the room. He was older, of course, a little grayer around the edges, but the spark of familiarity was instant. They had exchanged pleasantries, catching up on life and family, but there was an undercurrent beneath the conversation, something unsaid, unresolved. Later that evening, they found themselves in the hotel bar, talking over wine like they used to when they were younger, and the years seemed to melt away. She hadn't meant to stay so late, hadn't meant to let her mind wander to what could have been, but it did. She didn't act on it, of course. She loved Tom. She loved the life they had built together. But Ben represented something different, something lost. After that conference, she couldn't stop thinking about him. She felt guilty, ashamed even, but the feelings wouldn't leave her. So one night, she sat down and wrote the letter. It was never meant to be sent. She just needed to get the words out, to express what she couldn't say aloud. She tucked it away, hoping that would be enough. But the guilt lingered. Sarah knew something was wrong in her marriage. She and Tom had drifted. They rarely talked about anything meaningful anymore, and the routine of life had left them both emotionally exhausted. But she had never imagined it would lead her here, sitting in a cafe, lost in thoughts about a man from her past, wondering if she had made the right choices in life. She checked her watch. It was time to head home. The kids would be staying with Tom's mum for the weekend. And she wanted to talk to Tom tonight, maybe find a way to reconnect. Little did she know what was waiting for her. When Sarah walked into the house later that evening, she found Tom sitting at the kitchen table, the letter laid out in front of him. Her heart stopped, her breath catching in her throat. "Tom," she started, but he cut her off with a look. It was a look she had never seen before. It wasn't anger, not fully, but it was something close. His eyes were filled with hurt, disbelief, and betrayal. "What is this, Sarah?" he asked, his voice steady but cold. He tapped the letter. "Did you write this?" Sarah's legs felt like jelly, and she had to steady herself against the counter. She couldn't lie. Not now. "Yes," she whispered, tears already welling up in her eyes. "But I didn't send it. I didn't." "You didn't send it, but you wrote it. You felt it," Tom said, his voice rising. "How long, Sarah?" "How long have you been in love with him?" "I'm not in love with him," she said, her voice shaky. I don't know why I wrote it, I just—" "Don't lie to me!" Tom shouted, standing up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Don't you dare lie to me now, Sarah! You don't write a letter like this unless you mean it." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she struggled to find the right words. "I love you, Tom. I love our life together. But sometimes, I wonder what would have happened if things had been different. I never meant to act on it. I never meant to hurt you." Tom stared at her, his heart breaking all over again. "But you did, Sarah. You hurt me more than you'll ever know." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of her confession hanging between them like a dark cloud. Sarah wanted to reach out to him, to hold him, to make it all better, but she knew it wasn't that simple. Not this time. Tom turned away, running a hand through his hair. "I need to think," he muttered, and without another word, he walked out the door. Tom drove for hours that night, his mind racing. He ended up at a small park on the outskirts of town, a place he used to go when he needed to clear his head. He sat on a bench, staring out at the moonlit sky, trying to make sense of everything. Was this the end? Could he ever trust Sarah again? Could they rebuild what had been broken? He thought about their life together, the good and the bad. Their wedding day, when Sarah had looked at him with so much love in her eyes that he thought his heart would burst. The birth of their first child, the way Sarah had held his hand and smiled through the pain. The countless nights they had stayed up late, talking about their dreams for the future. But then he thought about the distance that had grown between them in recent years. The way they barely talked anymore, except to discuss the kids or the bills. The way Sarah had seemed distant, distracted, like she was always somewhere else. Had he been blind to it all? Had he missed the signs that something was wrong? He wasn't sure. All he knew was that he was in pain, deep, aching pain, and he didn't know how to fix it. Back at home, Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the letter on the nightstand. She hated herself for writing it. She hated herself even more for hurting Tom. She thought about the early days of their relationship, when everything had been so easy, so full of joy. They had met at a mutual friend's barbecue, and she had been instantly drawn to his quiet strength, his kindness, his unwavering loyalty. They had built a life together, an imperfect, messy, beautiful life. And she had thrown it all away with one stupid letter. But it wasn't just the letter, she realized. It was everything that had led up to it. The emotional distance, the unspoken frustrations, the unmet needs. She had been lost in her own dissatisfaction, and instead of reaching out to Tom, she had retreated into her memories of Ben, using him as an escape from the reality of her marriage. Now she had to face the consequences of her actions. Days turned into weeks, and the tension between Tom and the silence in the house was deafening. They started seeing a marriage counselor, though neither of them was sure if it would help. The first few sessions were painful, filled with accusations, hurt feelings, and tears. Tom was angry. Angry at Sarah. Angry at himself for not seeing it sooner. Angry at the world for pulling them apart. But slowly, something shifted. Through the counselor's guidance, they began to talk. Really talk. For the first time in years, they shared their fears, their insecurities, their regrets. Tom admitted that he had been neglecting their emotional connection, focusing too much on work and not enough on their relationship. Sarah confessed that she had been using her feelings for Ben as a way to avoid dealing with her unhappiness. It wasn't easy. Some days it felt like they were taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but they kept at it, determined to find their way back to each other. One evening, months after the letter had been discovered, Tom and Sarah sat on their porch, watching the sun set over the horizon. The air was warm, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink. "I don't know if we'll ever be the same," Tom said quietly, his hand resting on the arm of his chair. "I don't either," Sarah replied, her voice soft. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe we can be something new, something better." Tom turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. "Do you still think about him?" Sarah hesitated for a moment before shaking her head. "Number, I don't. Not anymore." Tom nodded, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "I want to believe that, Sarah. I really do." "I know," she whispered, reaching out to take his hand. "I'll spend the rest of my life proving it to you." They sat in silence for a long time, watching the sun dip below the horizon. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but for the first time in a long time, they felt like they were on the same page, facing the future together. Thank you for reading. Do you think Tom and Sarah will make it through? Have you ever faced something similar in your own life? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more emotional, heartfelt stories.
You old hag with no money, you're just a burden. We'll be taking all the inheritance, so get out of the way now, she demanded, heartlessly, right after our father's funeral. My brother's wife kicked Mom out. I couldn't believe what my sister-in-law had said. This was just too cruel. I was furious and about to lash out at my brother and his wife, but Mom stopped me. She whispered in my ear, "That girl, she's stunned." I looked at Mom, confused, not understanding what she meant. "My name is Rose. I'm just an ordinary office worker at a small to medium-sized company. My family's home is a famous upscale restaurant in our hometown. When people find out, they're always surprised. They can't imagine someone as plain and unnoticeable as me being associated with fine dining. In reality, I have little to do with that restaurant now. My brother really followed in Dad's footsteps as a chef, and his wife, Charlotte, helps run the place. It's clear they will take over the restaurant, and there's no role for me. Dad was a chef and entrepreneur who made the restaurant famous in just 1 generation. In a word, he was a go-getter. He was tough at work, so I think it was hard on Mom, my brother, and his wife who worked with him. But away from work, Dad was a loving family man who made people laugh with his jokes. I loved Dad for that. Then one day, I got a call from Mom at work. "Your father has collapsed. Come to the hospital right away." I could tell from Mom's voice that Dad's situation was serious. I rushed to the hospital. When I arrived, Mom and the doctor were talking, looking very serious. "Mom, is Dad okay?" I asked after the doctor left, not knowing what was going on. Mom was looking worriedly at Dad lying in bed and stroking his hand. His hands were thick and hard, like a craftsman's. I loved Dad's hands. "He's not in immediate danger, but it seems there will be after effects," Mom murmured, still looking at Dad. The doctor had told her that Dad would probably be paralyzed on his right side. Not being able to move his right hand would be the hardest thing for Dad. Mom and I sighed, unable to talk any further. "Is my father-in-law okay?" My sister-in-law's voice echoed in the quiet hospital room. She had rushed over after hearing from Mom. I thought she was worried, but as soon as she heard about Dad's condition and the after-effects, her expression changed and she began to smirk. "Well, he can't cook anymore, so the restaurant is ours now," she said callously. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The sister-in-law I knew was quiet, never going against Mom, Dad, or my brother, always smiling, always considerate. But the person in front of me now was like a stranger. I couldn't keep up with her sudden change. That's her true nature. "She's been hiding it, but she's really wicked," Mom said, sighing. I was worried about Dad's condition, but my sister-in-law's behavior was so shocking that I left the hospital that day in confusion. 2 weeks later, Dad was discharged and returned home. Dad's body was now so frail that he couldn't even manage to go to the bathroom or eat on his own. Proud as he was, Dad would sometimes throw tantrums and throw things. I was worried about Dad and Mom, who was taking care of him. I went back to my parents' house to help with caregiving whenever I had time. "You're coming back too often, it's annoying," my sister-in-law would make snide remarks every time she saw me. But that wasn't something I could worry about. Mom looked more worn out every time I saw her. She was taking care of Dad, toiling over meals and baths all by herself all day long, probably without any time to rest. Though they sometimes hired a helper, Mom's burden was still significant. My brother and sister-in-law, who lived with them, not only refused to help with Dad's care but also didn't even prepare Mom's meals. "Mom, you must be having a hard time alone. Should I quit my job and come back here, not just to help occasionally but to take care of Dad together?" Since my brother and his wife were clearly unreliable, I had no choice but to help Mom. I seriously considered joining in Dad's caregiving, but even when I suggested it, Mom shook her head. "There's a helper, and I'm fine on my own." "You don't have to worry about me," Mom answered with a smile, perhaps not wanting to worry me. But she looked like she was pushing herself too hard. I was driven by anxiety that Mom might collapse too. Then the situation took a turn for the worse. Dad, who had become quite disheartened, began to show symptoms of dementia. "Who are you?" Being told that by my own father was quite painful. He used to act so high and mighty, and now he didn't even recognize his own daughter. Apathetic, my sister-in-law, who happened to peek into the room, sneered at me. Forgotten by Dad or not, her attitude, on top of the shock I was already feeling, hurt me even more. "Father-in-law smells a bit. If you want to stay in this house, you better behave," my sister-in-law, her face twisted, pinched her nose and looked at Dad with contempt. Mom completely ignored her. She was probably holding back from reacting to the provocation. My sister-in-law clicked her tongue and left the room. "Dad, it's okay," Mom spoke to Dad in a gentle voice, like soothing a child. Thinking about how my parents were being treated so roughly by my brother and his wife, I felt like crying. Dad's dementia continued to progress, and his body weakened more and more. It was soon becoming impossible to care for him at home. As I pondered what to do with my parents, my brother, who rarely spoke to me even when I visited home, called me. I answered the phone and complained to him about his wife's attitude, but he brushed off my words and started talking about himself, saying it wasn't important. Then he asked me to help out at the restaurant on weekends. I thought it was very selfish of him, so I told him I would consult with Mom and get back to him, then hung up. I immediately called Mom and relayed the conversation with my brother to her. Mom then explained the reason my brother had asked for my help. The longtime employees and chefs are quitting one after another. Almost no one is left. They all say they can't keep up with the new way of doing things. I haven't been to the restaurant in a while, so I don't know the details. Mom was no longer involved in the restaurant's operations, but even while caring for Dad, she was concerned about it. It was a place they had worked hard to build together. There must be a strong attachment, and it was only natural to be concerned. She must also be worried about the employees with whom they had shared joys and sorrows. I could sense her disappointment that things had come to this. I'll go help out at the restaurant this weekend. I'll see for myself what's going on, so don't worry. After discussing it with my mom, we decided that Dad would go to daycare while I couldn't help with caregiving that weekend. I changed into an employee uniform in the locker room of my family's restaurant. How many years had it been since I last wore this uniform? I felt nostalgic, but looking around, I didn't recognize any faces. Young people, who Dad would never have hired if he were still active, ones with piercings and conspicuous tattoos, were struggling in their unfamiliar uniforms as they carried food. The interior of the restaurant, which I hadn't visited in a long time, had changed significantly from my memory. I walked around the restaurant to regain my senses. Then, from a large space created by connecting several tables, I heard lively voices. Looking over, I saw my sister-in-law. She wasn't working but was having a banquet with about 30 women her age. My sister-in-law was sitting in the center of the table, happily guzzling wine. Ladies of my class, all our dishes are high-end and delicious. Today's my treat, so enjoy yourselves to the fullest. Truffles, foie gras, eat as much as you want. My sister-in-law, who seemed quite drunk, used an empty wine bottle as a microphone and said something outrageous. Cheers erupted from those present. Charlotte, are you serious? Doing that will cause a huge deficit for the restaurant. I hurried over to my sister-in-law to stop her. She suddenly changed her cheerful face and glared at me. Shut up. A sister-in-law who can't even get married should keep quiet. This is my restaurant, so I can do whatever I want, she said, making a dismissive gesture to shoo me away. I swallowed the words, "This is my parents' restaurant," and left the table. The situation in the restaurant was dire. The kitchen was overwhelmed by the unreserved, all-you-can-eat orders from the group led by my sister-in-law, and they couldn't handle the orders from other customers. Regular customers from Dad's time were so angry that they left, saying, "How long are you going to make us wait?" I had never seen these customers angry before. Realizing how bad it was, I asked the chefs to put my sister-in-law's table on hold and suggested prioritizing the other customers, but they said they couldn't. My sister-in-law had told them to prioritize her table. If they didn't listen, they would be scolded later, the chef said, looking down. My brother was engrossed in a horse racing broadcast, seemingly oblivious to the chaos. He probably became a chef just by going along with the atmosphere around him. As soon as Dad, who was intimidating, was gone from the kitchen, this happened. Since childhood, he had always watched Dad's face, and now that Dad was gone, he was watching Charlotte's face. This was not good. I approached the table again to warn my sister-in-law about the orders. Just then, a long-serving employee whom I knew was telling my sister-in-law, "We can't serve that dish anymore. We've run out of the main ingredient, truffles." The moment the employee bowed his head, my sister-in-law raised her voice in anger. "Then go buy some. You should know that much, you useless person," she yelled, even throwing an empty plate at the employee. She was acting more like a rowdy, drunken customer than an owner. I understood why the long-serving employees had been quitting one after another. "I'm thinking of changing the name of this restaurant. The current name is old-fashioned and cliché. I want something more stylish and cool," my sister-in-law said, turning to her friends and laughing. The restaurant, once a renowned establishment, was finished. The essence of what it used to be was nowhere to be seen. After finishing my shift, I headed to the locker room, wondering how to tell Mom about the situation. She would surely be heartbroken to hear about this. My steps felt heavy as I headed home. The next day, when I visited my parents' house, I honestly told Mom about the state of the restaurant. Mom sighed sadly. I thought it might be like that. Your brother has been under Charlotte's thumb since Dad fell ill, and the restaurant can't survive without your father, she said, tears welling in her eyes, her lips trembling. Seeing Mom like that, I couldn't hold back my own tears. I'm sorry. If I had been stronger, I could have protected Dad and Mom's restaurant, I said, feeling a deep sense of regret. Mom patted my shoulder, saying it was okay. Let's give up on the restaurant, Mom persuaded me. After that, I continued to refuse my brother's requests to help at the restaurant. No matter how many times I refused, he kept calling, and his complaints about my sister-in-law began to seep into the conversation. She was still inviting acquaintances and treating them, and the restaurant was facing a huge deficit. They were even struggling to pay for supplies. Furthermore, despite having no money, my sister-in-law insisted on renovating the restaurant into a stylish cafe bar. That has nothing to do with me, I would say, hanging up the phone in the middle of the conversation every time. They could do whatever they wanted with the restaurant. All I wished for was for Dad and Mom to live a peaceful life. A few months later, Dad suddenly passed away from pneumonia. Many people came to the funeral to honor the man known for his kindness and his inability to refuse requests. Mom greeted the condolence visitors with composure. You must be tired, mother-in-law. Please rest in the back. I'll take care of the guests, my sister-in-law asserted herself. At times like this, she probably didn't like Mom taking charge of the funeral, wanting to show she was the face of the family. No, I'm in charge of the funeral, so I will properly greet everyone, Mom firmly rebuked her. Whether overwhelmed by Mom's forcefulness or not, my sister-in-law left the scene with a bitter face. Under Mom's direction, Dad's funeral proceeded smoothly. Chefs who had trained under Dad, familiar regular customers, and many people I knew came and offered their condolences to Mom and me. They didn't even make eye contact with my brother and his wife. They all knew what my brother and his wife had been doing since Dad fell ill. Throughout the funeral, my brother and his wife looked distinctly uncomfortable. I wish they would just keep quiet, I thought as I looked at them. When all of your father-in-law's inheritance goes to us, you should renounce your share too, my sister-in-law said, approaching us after the cremation. As Mom held Dad's ashes, getting ready to leave, my sister-in-law continued, the shop, the house, the money, we'll take all the inheritance. It's only natural since we've had to put up with that arrogant old man for so long. Her words were truly appalling. How much more could this woman belittle others after having relied on them for so long? You penniless old woman, you're in the wrong. You should leave the house right away. We're strangers now, so don't contact us, she spat at Mom. I was so angry, it felt like I was losing my mind. I almost grabbed my sister-in-law, but Mom held my arm and shook her head. It's okay, it's over now, Mom said, looking at me. My sister-in-law laughed and walked away. I felt like running after her and kicking her, but Mom was still holding my hand. When Mom couldn't see Charlotte anymore, she let go of my hand, then looked at my face and smiled. That girl, she's finished, Mom said. I was puzzled by her words. Mom said nothing more and began to get ready to leave again. You'll understand in time, Mom said, holding Dad's ashes with her usual gentle smile. After that, Mom, who had been driven out of her home, started living in my condominium. Surprisingly, Mom had saved a considerable amount of money in her name. It seems Dad had been paying Mom a substantial salary, and with that saved money as capital, Mom had been increasing her assets through investments like stocks. This place is too cramped. Let's buy a more spacious condominium, Mom said. She is currently looking for a property for the two of us to live in. 3 months later, a call came from my sister-in-law. Why didn't you tell me about father-in-law's debt? A scary debt collector is sitting in the shop. What are you going to do about it? She screamed as soon as I picked up the phone. Her voice was so loud that Mom, who was next to me, could hear everything. Hearing my sister-in-law's screams, Mom gave a mischievous smile and took the phone from me. "Oh, Charlotte, it's been a while. Your father-in-law was too kind-hearted and became a guarantor for other people's debts. Before we knew it, the debt had grown to a huge amount. I've been repaying it until now, but it's your turn from now on. After all, you're taking all the inheritance, aren't you?" Mom spoke with a chuckle. Even though she was laughing, her eyes were cold. Mom must have been harboring quite a bit of anger herself. "Mother-in-law, I apologize for everything. Let's live together again and run the shop, please." My sister-in-law changed her attitude and begged. I couldn't believe she could say such a thing. "I never want to deal with you two again." Mom's voice was colder than ice. I had never heard such desperation before. She ignored my sister-in-law's screams and hung up the phone. "Block her calls, please," Mom said, smiling as she handed the phone back to me. We had already purchased a new condominium and started our new life there. Of course, my brother and his wife don't know our location, so we'll probably never see them again. Later, through local acquaintances, I learned that my family's restaurant had closed. My brother and his wife had lost the shop and the house to debt and were left penniless. They still have outstanding debts, so they are now working from morning to night at a chain restaurant, living in a small apartment. The voices of the couple arguing can be heard echoing through the halls. Meanwhile, Mom and I recently finished observing Dad's third death anniversary. We dined at a restaurant opened by Dad's top disciple, where the food tasted just like what Dad used to make. That night, we reminisced about Dad and enjoyed a feast of gourmet dishes to our heart's content.
My wife, Sherry, believed I was unaware of her plans, thinking I was either foolish or oblivious to her growing affair with her coworker Todd. She assumed I'd tolerate her actions and accept her continuing to be involved with him. However, she had another thing coming. She didn't realize I'd been suspicious for quite some time. I noticed changes, clear signs of infidelity, like working late frequently, upgrading her wardrobe, more aggressive closeness, and a loss of interest in our shared interests. Despite my attempts to discuss my concerns, she consistently ignored them. Sherry, naturally, denied anything was wrong, attributing it to my insecurities and possessiveness working overtime. I had no choice but to hire a private investigator. I refused to remain blind to the truth. I'd made it clear from the beginning of our relationship, and reiterated it over our 10-year marriage, that I would never tolerate my wife cheating on me. So it was with mixed feelings that I sat in private investigator Jake Sloan's office and listened to his report. I felt relieved when he made it clear that Sherry hadn't cheated. However, that relief was short-lived when he added the term, "for now." As he explained, my wife was having an affair. It just hadn't escalated to something intimate, but it was only a matter of time. Apparently, Sherry and Todd referred to themselves as working spouses. I detested that term. Sherry had only one spouse, me. Some might find that expression cute and harmless, but to me, it meant she was having an intimate relationship with someone else. Well, as it turns out, that's exactly what she was having. According to the private investigator's report, Sherry and Todd had lunch together daily, just the two of them. They held hands and sat next to each other. He provided numerous photos of them hugging, sometimes even kissing. I was infuriated by what I saw and wanted to strangle that smug idiot Todd. In addition to lunches, the lovers often worked late together, even though there was no good reason for it. It was as if they wanted to avoid going home to their respective spouses and siphon as much of our time out of each day as possible. The detective told me that he was able to trace Sherry's emails and messages. I knew this was completely illegal and I could never use it in a divorce. In our state, divorce for infidelity was possible but difficult. No-fault divorces were much easier, and I didn't need evidence for that anyway. I just wanted it for my own purposes. Sloan refused to give me copies of the actual messages. He wouldn't even let me see them. Instead, he offered me a summary of what they contained. He assured me that my wife had never spoken disparagingly of me. Several times Todd tried to disparage me, but Sherry wouldn't let him. Well, I guess it could have been worse. Emails and texts confirmed their romantic relationship. Although neither of them professed love, their conversations were very intimate, bordering on texting. Todd sent my wife pictures of his buddy, which she took delight in reciprocating with shots of her bare chest. As far as Sloane could tell, she hadn't sent any explicit pictures yet. As I sat in his office pondering my next steps, Sloane gave me the worst news of all. Todd's wife was going out of town for 3 days to visit her mother. The lovers decided to take the opportunity to meet up and consummate their relationship. The only thing standing in their way was me. They were uncertain about how they could spend the night together if I remained in the vicinity. Since I had no intention of leaving town, making it nearly impossible, they contemplated various plans. One idea was to inform me that Sherry was going on a girls-only weekend trip, fearing I might discover the truth by talking to her friends. However, she didn't want to involve anyone to create a believable cover story, leading to the abandonment of that idea. Another option they considered was compelling me to leave town, but I dismissively remembered Sherry suggesting I organize a golf trip with my buddies, an option I rejected. Ultimately, they opted for a new but direct approach: honesty. Todd believed I was on the path to becoming a betrayed man and that I would do anything to keep Sherry as my loving, happy wife, even allowing her to have an affair. Somehow, he convinced Sherry that by sleeping with him, she would enhance our lovemaking life and relationship. He persuaded her that all she needed to do was disclose her plans with Todd to me, and I would reluctantly agree to let her proceed. Clearly, Todd underestimated my resolve, but what surprised me the most was that Sherry bought into his deceptive narrative. It should have been evident to her that I wouldn't tolerate this, and if she failed to realize that, then she might be mentally unstable. Sloane informed me that this was all the information they had, so I accepted what he provided and went home. I requested him to continue monitoring Sherry's messages and update me if anything changed. On Friday, Sloane called me and informed me that Sherry planned to meet me the following Monday after work. She intended to disclose that she would go on a date with Todd on Friday night, starting with dinner and dancing and culminating with the couple spending the night in a hotel room. She would thoughtfully return to my house on Saturday or maybe Sunday, depending on their activities. Sherry and Todd rehearsed her entire speech, convincing themselves that I would acquiesce to her demands. They anticipated my initial upset and anger, but Sherry planned to assure me that it was a one-time thing, despite both knowing otherwise. She even suggested having lovemaking with me afterward as a reward for my understanding, assuming I would be pleased to have Todd's sloppy seconds and comply with her wishes. How considerate of them to think of my needs. With only 2 days to prepare for the confrontation, Sherry and Todd jokingly referred to it as an intervention. However, I was determined to turn their intervention into my stand. Over the weekend, I contemplated various scenarios, pondering whether I wanted to salvage my marriage. My plan of action evolved organically as I considered my feelings for Sherry. I decided to confront the issue directly and end it for good. Initially blissfully happy when we first got married, Sherry and I spent all our time together, sharing everything we had experienced in life. She was my best friend and my best lover, but somehow it all seemed to disappear. Perhaps that's just the way things work. Nothing lasts forever. Maybe my view of marriage was old-fashioned and idealized, envisioning us as a team facing life's trials and tribulations together. Having experienced unsuccessful marriages before, Sherry and I questioned whether the problem lay with us or the institution of marriage itself. How can people expect to maintain feelings, desires, interests, and passions when fate insists on being fickle and changing everything and everyone? In a world of fast-paced culture, social media, and instant gratification, perhaps marriage, like dinosaurs and CDs, is obsolete. Briefly considering the idea of letting Sherry be with Todd, I quickly dismissed it, refusing to let him claim rights to my wife. I was ready for a fight when my wife called me just after lunch on Monday. "Hey, Sherry," I said, noting her recent lack of calls during my work hours. I expressed my concern about it and hoped everything was okay. She greeted me with a "Hi, honey," which made me wonder if she used the same endearment with Todd. Despite the thought, I brushed it off and inquired about her being home on time tonight, as she had something important to discuss. Responding positively, I mentioned having important news as well, and confirmed my availability around 5:15. However, she didn't respond immediately, and I sensed her motive for asking. When she asked about the nature of my big news, I decided to keep it for our later face-to-face conversation. I excused myself, citing the urgency of my monthly report, and hung up. I then informed my boss about taking the rest of the day off, and he didn't mind. Sitting at the kitchen table later, I anxiously awaited her arrival. The garage door opened at 5:27, and despite my high emotions, I maintained a calm exterior. I had an open bottle of Sauvignon Blanc on ice and 2 glasses ready. She entered alone, tossing her keys and purse on the table, and I felt relieved she hadn't brought Todd along, which would have complicated things. I welcomed her with a smile. "Hi, sweetheart," I greeted her warmly, using the affectionate term she had employed earlier. I welcomed her home and asked whether she needed some time before our conversation or if she preferred to dive right in. My immediate desire to talk took her by surprise, and I could tell she wasn't prepared for it so soon. My goal was to keep her in suspense and maintain the upper hand. Acknowledging her surprise at my readiness to talk, Sherry admitted she hadn't expected me to wait. Nevertheless, she agreed that starting our conversation sooner would be better and joined me at the table. I proposed the idea of sharing my news first and inquired if she had any objections. Hesitantly, she responded, indicating that it was okay and expressing a slight uncertainty. Without waiting for her response, I poured us both a glass of wine. She accepted it gratefully, drinking half before I refilled her glass. Starting to discuss my thoughts on the matter, I conveyed that I had been reflecting on it a lot. I made it clear that I wouldn't beat around the bush and saw no point in dragging it out. Pausing deliberately to create tension, I observed Sherry stepping forward, her gaze fixed on me. Curious, she asked, "What's the matter?" I conveyed my desire for a divorce, stating it bluntly and allowing a few moments for Sherry to grasp the message. Initially, confusion clouded her face, as if the words weren't registering. Eventually, understanding dawned, and she reacted with shock. Fear and anxiety briefly flickered across her expression, quickly replaced by surprise, perhaps stemming from concerns about her affair with Todd being exposed. In response to her query about the reason, I disclosed that my feelings had changed, expressing, "I don't love you anymore." My words appeared to affect Sherry deeply. Struggling to comprehend my statement, she questioned, "You what?" "I've fallen out of love with you, Sherry," I declared, sharing the fabricated detail that I couldn't recall the exact moment. In truth, I was well aware it had been a long time, but I had avoided confronting the reality. Perplexed, she asked, "What are you talking about?" Her expression hinted at an impending emotional breakdown, catching me off guard. In an attempt to illustrate my perspective, I prompted her to recall the early days of our marriage. Reminiscing about our shared activities and routines, I highlighted the close bond we once had. Sherry nodded in agreement as I continued, mentioning our joint lunches, the anticipation of returning home to each other, and shared hobbies, including the pottery classes she had persuaded me to join. Her intense gaze indicated she was captivated by the memories. It wasn't about the pottery, it was about sharing the experience with her. She expressed that she loved every minute of it, watching me and assisting me. She admired my enthusiasm. Similarly, painting the Christmas Village buildings became a shared activity we enjoyed. We purchased a dozen unpainted houses, creating a display for Christmas. It was a tedious task, but we found pleasure in it. Sherry admitted that mine were always better than hers. Recalling the night spent at the table applying paint to the shingles, Sherry nodded in agreement. Back then, I loved her deeply. We also dedicated hours to painting large posters she had acquired during a trip to Myrtle Beach, long before adult coloring books became popular. Although we still had hundreds of coloring pens, they, like our love, had all dried up. When Sherry defensively asserted that her love hadn't dried up, I chose to ignore her and continued. Our friends often expressed jealousy over our relationship. We did everything together, taking long walks daily while holding hands. If I needed to run errands, such as going to the hardware store for grass trimmer line, she would accompany me. Similarly, if she wanted to shop for clothes, I would patiently wait outside the dressing room. Sherry challenged me, noting that I didn't enjoy accompanying her during shopping trips. I explained that I was often on my phone, not particularly interested in the clothes, but rather there to be with her. I emphasized that I didn't mind what she chose, finding her beautiful in everything. I mentioned that I could have stayed home watching sports, but chose to be with her instead. We discussed how other women in the neighborhood gathered for activities like bingo or bachelorette parties, but Sherry never showed interest. Recalling her reason for not participating, I acknowledged her previous comment about preferring to hang out with me than with the chickens. Reflecting on our shared moments, we remembered cuddling under the covers on many nights, watching a favorite movie. Sherry, wiping a tear away, expressed her love for the film. I mentioned that we must have watched it at least 100 times and expressed a desire to continue watching it together. In response to my mention of divorce, Sherry exclaimed her reluctance to end the marriage. She envisioned growing old together, taking cooking and ballroom dancing lessons, or simply lying in bed and reading books. Expressing the growing estrangement between us, I admitted uncertainty about when it began, looking intently into her eyes. We transitioned from dining out 2 or 3 days a week to a weekly occurrence, a change largely influenced by Sherry. She claimed a lack of time for lunch outside the office, which turned out to be untrue. She continued eating out, but with someone else. Eventually, we ceased having lunch together entirely, and I started joining my coworkers. I gradually found enjoyment in their company, perhaps even too much. In the conversation, I exaggerated the situation, making an effort not to place blame solely on Sherry. I wanted to avoid triggering defensiveness or turning the discussion into a scolding. That wasn't my goal, at least not yet. Our habit of coming home early to spend time together lost its significance. We began working later and later, and when we finally did return home, we often felt distant or distracted. Responding to Sherry's question about why I never talked about it, I acknowledged that she was right. Despite having expressed these concerns many times before, I agreed with her, expressing a wish to understand why spending time together hadn't been important for her. I admitted feeling a sense of failure in that regard. I felt like I was taking responsibility for our estrangement. That was far from the truth. I knew that if I hit Sherry with Todd first, we couldn't end the discussion without it getting nasty. I would never make her see my side of things. I'd be the controlling, jealous idiot before I revealed what I knew. I wanted her to remember what we had and think about her role in destroying it. Gradually, we stopped doing almost everything together. You started going to your bachelorette parties, I started going to poker nights, you'd go to spas on the weekends, I'd go golfing. Sherry and I began to spend entire days without discussing anything beyond the weather or the latest news. Our lovemaking life also suffered, with fatigue or lack of interest often hindering our closeness. Reflecting on our early days of marriage, I pointed out how we couldn't get enough of each other. We used to engage in intimate activities 4 or 5 days a week, sometimes multiple times a day. I mentioned playfully fondling her while she cooked, skipping dinner to spend the night together. Activities like going to the hot tub, which used to be a regular part of our routine, had become non-existent for over a year. When Sherry suggested that I didn't want lovemaking anymore, I refuted the idea, finding it baseless. I believed she might be trying to shift blame onto me to justify her own behavior. In response, I laughed and clarified, "Oh God, no, I never stopped wanting lovemaking. I'm just as eager now as I was 10 years ago. I simply stopped wanting lovemaking with you." I knew that would hurt deeply. She thought she had rejected me physically, and here I was telling her that our lack of lovemaking was because I didn't want her. I almost would have laughed if I hadn't been so hurt. Sherry, taken aback, asked what I meant when I mentioned she didn't want to have lovemaking with me. I casually mentioned losing interest and described how, from my perspective, she seemed unresponsive and disinterested in anything exciting or remotely naughty. I suggested that it appeared as though she wanted to finish quickly and move on to more interesting activities like knitting. Expressing my desire for weekend lovemaking marathons, I emphasized that she didn't even want me to give her an incredible pleasure. I labeled our physical encounters as boring and claimed that I had faked enjoyment in the last few instances just to get it over with. When Sherry objected, claiming that I came inside her, I reminded her that she insisted on using contraceptives, despite being on birth control. I explained that she never paid attention to the contraceptives, making it easy for me to fake it by humming, rolling off, and disposing of the empty contraceptive. Her reaction was one of shock and embarrassment, and I admitted that my plan had worked. Apologizing, I added insult to injury by suggesting, "It was me, not you." She stared at me for a moment, her face flushed, tears dried. I wasn't sure if her expression reflected anger, frustration, or embarrassment. In an attempt to ease the tension, I refilled her empty glass, and she took a big sip. Continuing, I explained that it was only a matter of time before we started seeking companionship elsewhere. I clarified that when I said someone else, I didn't mean myself, though she wasn't aware of that distinction. Suddenly, Sherry asked angrily if I was cheating on her or in love with someone else. In response, I reassured her of my commitment to our marriage and emphasized my aversion to infidelity. I acknowledged our shared history of being betrayed by our previous spouses, expressing my dedication to not repeating those mistakes. Sherry apologized, recognizing the unfair accusation and agreeing that she knew I wouldn't engage in such behavior. However, she looked guilty and couldn't meet my gaze, her hands trembling. Transitioning to the topic of our intimate relationship, I suggested waiting until after the divorce to be together for the first time, hinting at a new love interest. I then revealed my big news, stating that I had met with my lawyer and finalized the paperwork. I informed her that she would be served with divorce papers on Friday. In response to her desperate inquiry, I reiterated that she would indeed be served on Friday, attempting to conceal a smile. I explained that it was for the best, allowing both of us to regain our freedom and acknowledge that the last 10 years had been a waste of our time. I expressed that the past years weren't a waste of time for me, and suggested to Sherry that she likely desired the divorce as much as I did. I mentioned that it seemed she hadn't wanted to be with me for a long time, labeling our wedding as a mistake. Sherry objected, expressing her unwillingness to get a divorce. She insisted that she loved me and wanted to be married forever. Regrettably, I responded that I no longer loved her, citing the no-fault divorce state we were in. I explained that splitting assets equally was the norm, and we could avoid a messy legal process unless one of us cheated and infidelity could be proven, which was unlikely in our case. I proposed dividing our money equally, planning to visit the bank the next day. I mentioned the need to open new accounts, get new credit cards, change utility bills, and sell the house, with a realtor scheduled to put it on the market on Wednesday. Sherry, feeling overwhelmed, objected, expressing uncertainty and asking me to stop. She cried again as I assured her that I had already packed my things and would be staying in a hotel until a permanent move. I suggested she stay in the house until it was sold. Sherry shouted for me to wait, but I insisted there was no need, emphasizing the urgency to handle everything before Friday. Confused, she demanded to know the significance of that particular day. I casually mentioned that Friday was the day she had planned a date with Todd, her boyfriend. I suggested it was the day they intended to spend the night in a hotel together for a passionate evening. Sherry froze, her eyes wide and mouth agape. As she attempted to respond, I pulled out a folder containing a summary report from a private investigator. I showed her the section detailing her plans with Todd on Friday night. Interrupting her, I pointed out that the report confirmed their reservations at the Gaylord Texas for that night. When she started to explain, I cut her off, mockingly suggesting she might claim, "It's not what it looks like." I reminded her of the pictures capturing her and Todd kissing at lunch. Staring at me, tears streaming down her face, Sherry apologized quietly. With a wide smile on my face, I declared, "Now I remember exactly when I stopped loving you." I revealed that it was the day I discovered her plans to involve me in a betrayed man scenario, mirroring the betrayal from my ex-wife. She blurted out an apology, desperately trying to convince me that she didn't love Todd. According to her, the rendezvous with him was just a fling to rekindle our relationship. She assured me that after spending the night with Todd, we would spend the rest of the weekend having passionate love-making. She claimed Todd said it would turn me on and revitalize our sensuality. I countered, expressing my skepticism about revitalizing our lovemaking life by being with someone else instead of having it with me. I questioned the logic behind her actions. She attempted to change tactics, mentioning that Todd said I would be okay with it if it made her happy. I reiterated that I wanted her to be happy with me as we used to be, not with another man. I couldn't fathom how she thought I would be okay with such a proposition, given my clear stance against infidelity. She tried to justify her actions by claiming it wouldn't be infidelity since she would have my permission. Firmly, I stated that it would never happen, realizing that I should have understood that from the beginning. I expressed my disbelief at how I could have allowed boredom and loneliness to lead me down this path. I admitted that Todd had sparked my interest again, In response to her questioning how I could be bored and lonely when we were happily in love, I acknowledged that I didn't know. She continued, suggesting that I might have felt that way because I cut us off, stopped having lunch with her, and avoided spending time together. She accused me of choosing to put myself in that position and spending time with Todd instead of her, creating a situation where both Todd and I were bored and lonely. She denied the accusation, insisting that she couldn't believe she would have intentionally distanced herself. She recounted how I had told her I was too busy for lunch, and on one occasion, I had even texted her to go without me. She believed it was my decision for us to stop having lunch, and I never mentioned it, which she thought indicated I didn't realize the change. Sherry expressed that I had been so absorbed in my world with Todd that I didn't notice I was losing her. She declared that she didn't want Todd. She wanted me and us to be the way we used to be. Apologizing, she admitted to screwing up and giving up on us. I insisted it was too late, shaking my head in disagreement. Sherry pleaded, promising to quit her job, work elsewhere, and never see Todd again. She professed her love for me and claimed she hadn't cheated because they didn't have lovemaking. She acknowledged her foolishness, stating that Todd meant nothing to her and begging me not to leave. I maintained that it wasn't that simple, disagreeing when she said I stopped her before she went too far. I argued that just lovemaking would have sealed the deal. Sherry protested, saying they were just friends, and I countered, emphasizing that she should have been friends with me more than anyone else. Overwhelmed, Sherry dropped her head in her arms, sobbing, and vowed never to neglect me or take me for granted again. Sherry pleaded with me, asking if we could treat the situation as a big mistake and begging for forgiveness. I responded, stating that it wasn't just a mistake but a betrayal of our love. She insisted that her heart had always been mine, and I was the one who was willing to give my body to another man. I reminded her that she stopped me and questioned if my love for her was so insignificant that I couldn't fight for it. Expressing that she meant everything to me and that I'd fight for her, Sherry claimed she would die for me. I harshly declared my lack of affection, causing her to scream and attempt to pull me towards her. Despite her apologies and pleas, I asserted that while I believed she was sorry, it didn't change the fact that I no longer loved her. I assured her that she had Todd for comfort. Upon her revelation that Todd was married and only interested in a physical relationship, I grinned and suggested that his wife might have something to say about that. I informed her that both Todd's wife and I had used the same divorce attorney, handing her a folder containing the investigator's report, pictures of her with Todd, and details of the divorce proposal. I advised her to read the entire document. Sherry pleaded with me not to take such actions, suggesting that if I wanted to accompany her to the bank, I should call and let her know. I got up from the table and walked out of the house, ignoring the sound of my wife crying. Update. Sherry grappled with the divorce, and to avoid a prolonged and expensive legal battle, I agreed when the judge recommended marriage counseling. The counseling surpassed my expectations, fostering open and judgment-free communication between Sherry and me. She gained insight into why Todd's advances nearly jeopardized our marriage, and I conveyed the pain and humiliation she had caused. The counselor took pride in our progress. After a few sessions, I returned home, and we shared several passionate moments. Sherry willingly embraced my desires erotically. A year later, we had rekindled the loving connection we shared at the onset of our marriage. Sherry switched jobs and joined my company. We commuted together, had lunch daily, not out of obligation but genuine desire. In fact, we did nearly everything together. We adorned a small Christmas tree, completed abandoned paintings, took up another ceramics class, and enrolled in ballroom dancing. To my surprise, a box of colored pens I found wasn't dry. One night while cuddling under a blanket and watching You've Got Mail, Sherry kissed me and conveyed the need to discuss something important. Tears welled in her eyes, causing a moment of panic as my heart skipped a beat. Without giving me a chance to respond, Sherry revealed, "You're going to be a daddy." I smiled, wiped away her tears, and in a playful manner mimicked Tom Hanks saying, "Don't cry, Sellers." So I'm just obsessed with happy endings.